My name is Rachel Avery. I'm 34 years old, and I want to tell you about the morning I showed up for work and was told I was no longer cleared to fly. Not because anything was wrong with me, because someone had made sure the paperwork said otherwise. I need to start where this actually begins because the ending only makes sense if you understand what flying meant to me before any of this happened, and what it cost to almost lose it. My father was a crop duster in central Kansas, a man who thought in terms of wind direction and cloud formation the way other people thought in terms of traffic and weather apps. He taught me to fly in a Cessna 172 with a cracked instrument panel and a radio that cut out over certain fields. By the time I was old enough to solo, I already understood the sky better than I understood most people. I went into commercial aviation at 23. The training was grueling in the specific way of things that require your complete self, not just skill and knowledge, but the particular kind of mental discipline that keeps you calibrated under pressure, when every system in the aircraft is competing for your attention simultaneously. I passed every check ride. I earned my ATP certificate at 26. I was hired by a regional carrier based in Dallas at 27, flying regional routes up and down the Central. By 32, I had accumulated over 4,000 hours and was on the list for a captain upgrade. That list is important. It matters to what happened next. Promotions in commercial aviation move slowly, constrained by seniority systems and fleet size and market conditions that have nothing to do with individual performance. I had been a strong first officer for 5 years, good evaluations, clean record, commendations from 2 Czech airmen who had flown. My chief pilot had told me directly that I was well positioned for the next captain vacancy. There was one other first officer at my base with similar seniority and a comparable record. Her name was Dana Keller. Dana and I had been hired within 3 months of each other. We had gone through a significant portion of our initial training together, flown similar schedules, bid the same equipment. We were not close friends. The nature of the pairing system meant that you rarely flew with the same person consistently enough to build that kind of relationship. But we were cordial, professional, the kind of colleagues who knew each other's coffee orders and flight bag preferences without knowing much about each other's actual lives. I had no reason going into any of this to think of Dana as anything other than what she appeared to be, a competent pilot, a fair competitor for the same upgrade slot, a colleague I respected without knowing particularly well. I am telling you this because I want to be clear that I didn't see it coming. Not even close. The annual medical examination for airline transport pilots is conducted by an aviation medical examiner, an FAA-designated physician who reviews your health history, conducts a physical, and certifies that you meet the medical standards required to hold an ATP certificate. For a first-class medical, the class required to exercise ATP privileges. This examination happens every 12 months under the age of 40. My AME was a physician named Garrett who operated a clinic about 20 minutes from the airport. I had been seeing him for my annual medical for 4 years. The appointments were routine blood pressure, vision, the standard battery, and had never produced anything concerning. I was healthy. I knew I was healthy. The examinations were a formality I took seriously but had never had reason to worry about. My examination in November went exactly as it always had. Dr. Garrett found nothing. My blood pressure was normal. My vision was corrected to standard. My EKG showed a normal sinus rhythm. He certified my first-class medical for another 12 months and I left his office with the paperwork I needed to continue flying. 6 weeks later, I was called into my chief pilot's office. He was sitting behind his desk with an expression I had never seen on his face before, not anger, not quite, but something more careful than that. Something controlled. He told me the FAA had received results from my most recent medical examination, indicating a cardiac irregularity that required immediate review. He told me my first-class medical was being suspended pending further evaluation. He told me I was grounded until the matter was resolved. I sat across from him and felt the specific vertigo of hearing something that cannot be true and understanding, simultaneously, that it has been documented as true. There's no cardiac irregularity, I said. I had my examination 6 weeks ago. Dr. Garrett certified me without any findings. My chief pilot looked at the paperwork in front of him. The results we received indicate otherwise, he said. I understand this is a shock. The FAA review process has a clear pathway for contesting findings. I'd recommend you contact an aviation attorney and your AME immediately. I drove to Dr. Garrett's. He pulled up my file while I sat across from his desk, and his expression shifted in a way that told me something was wrong before he said a single word. The results in his system matched what he had told me at the examination, normal findings across the board, first-class medical certified without restriction. The results that had been submitted to the FAA were different. They showed an EKG with an abnormality flagged as potentially significant, a finding that, if accurate, would have grounded any airline pilot pending cardiac evaluation and would almost certainly have required a special issuance process that could take months or longer to resolve. Dr. Garrett looked at both sets of results for a long time. "These aren't the results from your examination," he said quietly. "I know they're not," I said. "What I need to understand is how different results ended up submitted to the FAA under my name." He pulled up the submission log for my file. The results that had been sent to the FAA had been submitted through his clinic's patient portal, a system accessible to staff members with appropriate credentials, approximately 4 days after my actual examination. He checked the access log. Someone had logged into the portal using the credentials of a staff member who had been on medical leave during that period and whose login had not been deactivated. He went pale. I contacted an aviation attorney named Marcus Webb the following morning. He had been recommended by another pilot I knew who had gone through an FAA enforcement action several years earlier. Marcus had a calm, methodical manner that I appreciated because it matched my own preference for approaching problems by understanding them completely before reacting to them. He filed an immediate request with the FAA for a stay of the medical suspension pending investigation. He contacted Dr. Garrett's clinic to begin preserving the access logs and submission records. He told me, clearly and without minimizing anything, that what appeared to have happened was a deliberate alteration of medical records submitted to a federal agency, which constituted multiple serious federal offenses. He also told me that the investigation would take time, and that during that time I would not be flying. I want to describe what those weeks felt like, because I think people who have never defined themselves through a profession in the way that pilots define themselves through flying may not fully understand what grounding means. It is not simply the loss of income, though the income loss was real and significant. It is the removal of the thing around which your entire professional identity, your daily routine, your sense of competence and purpose has been organized. I had been flying for 15 years. I had structured my sleep around flight schedules, my fitness around medical standards, my attention around the particular alertness that flying requires. Without it, I felt like a person who had been handed a version of their own life with the center removed. I started paying attention during those weeks to everything I could find out about how the portal breach had happened. Marcus had subpoenaed the clinic's full access records. The inactive staff credentials that had been used to submit the altered results, we traced, through IP address logs that the clinic's IT provider maintained, to a device that had connected to the clinic's network through a public Wi-Fi access point at a hotel near the airport. A hotel that, according to the records Marcus's investigator pulled, had a reservation during that period under the name of a pilot employed by my carrier. Dana Keller had stayed at that hotel for 2 nights, attending what was listed on her schedule as a training event. The training event had been at a facility on the other side of the city. The hotel was 4 blocks from Dr. Garrett's clinic. I want to be careful here about what I knew at that point and what I could prove, because they are not the same thing, and Marcus was very clear about the distinction. What I knew in my own mind was that Dana had done this. The proximity, the timing, the method, it fit together with the kind of precision that made coincidence feel impossible. What I could prove at that stage was a chain of circumstantial evidence that pointed strongly in one direction, but had not yet found the direct link that would make it prosecutable. That link came from the hotel's own IT records. The hotel, like most commercial properties, maintained logs of which devices connected to their Wi-Fi network and when. Marcus's investigator, working with a cybersecurity consultant, identified that a device had connected to the clinic's patient portal through the hotel's network during a specific 2-hour window on the evening of the 4th day after my examination. The device's MAC address was consistent with a model of laptop that Dana owned, a specific configuration that had been documented in our carrier's IT records when she had connected to the company network from the same device during a previous system update. It was not absolute proof. MAC addresses can be spoofed. Hotels are not crime scenes. But combined with everything else, the inactive credentials, the timing, the hotel booking, the upgrade list, it was enough for Marcus to take to the FAA's Civil Aviation Security Division and to the FBI's Aviation Crimes Unit, which handles federal offenses involving falsification of aviation safety records. The federal investigation took 4 months. During those 4 months, I was grounded. Dana continued to fly. I watched the upgrade list and understood without being told directly that the captain vacancy that had been expected to open in spring was moving forward without me in consideration. I want to be honest about what those 4 months cost, because I think the costs of something like this are rarely fully described. I lost 4 months of flight time, that would never be recovered toward my captain upgrade. I spent money on legal representation that I had not budgeted for. I spent hours in conversations with investigators that were necessary but exhausting. I spent time in a particular kind of limbo, knowing what had happened, unable to fully prove it yet, unable to fly, unable to explain to colleagues who asked why I wasn't on the line without discussing an ongoing federal investigation. My father called every Sunday. He never once suggested I should accept what had happened or find another path. He said every week in one form or another that the sky was mine and that no piece of paper could permanently change that. I held on to that with both hands. The federal investigation produced a result in March. The cybersecurity analysis of the clinic's access logs, combined with cell tower data placing Dana's phone in the vicinity of the hotel during the window in question, combined with a forensic examination of her laptop that was executed under a federal warrant, and revealed cached login credentials matching the inactive staff account, produced sufficient evidence for federal charges. Dana was charged with falsification of aviation medical records submitted to the FAA, unauthorized access to a protected computer system, and wire fraud. She did not go to trial. She accepted a plea agreement that included a felony conviction, a suspended sentence with 5 years of probation, community service, and, critically for me, a written factual statement admitting to the specific actions she had taken and the intent behind them. The intent, as described in that statement, was exactly what I had suspected from the beginning. Dana had identified that the captain upgrade vacancy was likely to go to one of the two of us based on the timeline and our relative seniority positions. She had researched the medical certification process and identified the patient portal as a vulnerability. She had used the inactive credentials, which she had obtained, the statement said, by observing a clinic staff member log in during an appointment she had at the same clinic for an unrelated matter, to access the system and substitute altered EKG results for my actual results. She had believed, the statement said, that the medical suspension would last long enough to remove me from upgrade consideration, and that the investigation, if any occurred, would be unable to trace the submission back to her. She had been wrong about the second part. My first-class medical was reinstated within 2 weeks of the plea agreement, once the FAA received the documentation establishing that my original results had been accurate, and that the submission of altered results had been a deliberate criminal act by a third party. I returned to flying in April. The captain upgrade that had been expected in spring had already been filled during my absence. I understood this. It was not something I could undo. What I could do, and did, was return to the line with a clean medical and a legal record that now included extensive documentation of what had been done to me and who had done it. My carrier removed Dana from the seniority list following her felony conviction. She lost her ATP certificate. She will not fly commercially again. I am 34 years old. I have over 4,000 flight hours and a first-class medical that is current and unencumbered. I have a father in central Kansas who still asks about wind direction when I call on Sundays. I have a captain upgrade that is, again, within reach on the seniority list. And I have learned something about the particular vulnerability of systems that seem secure, that a clinic portal, an inactive login, a public Wi-Fi connection, and 4 days of careful planning can do to a career what years of work and thousands of hours of flight time cannot easily undo. What I have also learned is that documentation is not just a bureaucratic habit. It is the thing that, when everything else is being contested, tells the truth in terms that cannot be argued with. Dr. Garrett's access logs told the truth. The hotel's network records told the truth. The forensic examination of a laptop told the truth. And eventually, when enough truths are assembled in the same place, they become something no one can fly around. I know that better. There is something I left out of the main telling that I think belongs here, because it changed how I understood the full scope of what Dana had done. About 2 weeks after her plea agreement was finalized, I received a call from another first officer at a different base, a woman named Christine who had heard, through the particular grapevine that exists among pilots at regional carriers, that I had been through something significant, and that it had involved a medical records issue. She asked if I would be willing to talk. I said yes. Christine told me that approximately 8 months before what happened to me, she had gone through her own unexplained medical suspension. Her results, submitted from a different AME at a different clinic, had shown an inner ear abnormality that her physician had no record of finding. The suspension had lasted 11 weeks before being resolved when her AME provided documentation that the submitted results did not. The investigation at the time had not identified a source for the altered results. The case had been closed as an unresolved anomaly in the submission system. Christine had been on an upgrade list at her base. She had not made the connection until she heard about my case that someone might have done to her deliberately what I now knew had been done to me deliberately. I gave Christine's information to Marcus, who passed it to the federal investigators. Whether Dana was responsible for what happened to Christine, whether the same method had been tested on another pilot before being used against me, I don't know for certain. The federal investigation into Christine's case was reopened, but as of the last update I received, had not produced charges. What I know is that the possibility exists. That what felt when it happened to me, like an act of targeted desperation, might have been something more considered. A method tested once, refined, deployed again with greater precision. That thought sits with me differently than the rest of it. When I think about Dana now, I try to hold the full picture rather than the simplified version. She was a competent pilot who had worked for years toward the same goal I had worked toward. She had watched the upgrade list the same. She had felt the same pressure of seniority systems and timing, and the particular anxiety of being close enough to something important to feel the distance clearly. None of that excuses what she did. Falsifying medical records in commercial aviation is not a desperate act in the way that term is sometimes used to generate sympathy. It is a deliberate choice to introduce false information into a safety-critical system, to ground a pilot on false pretenses, and to do so in a way designed to be untraceable. The fact that her plan was ultimately traceable does not change what it was intended to be. But I understand, in the way that you understand things you would never do yourself, how someone arrives at a decision like that. The accumulation of pressure, the narrowing of the visible options, the moment when a vulnerability presents itself and the part of you that wants something badly enough begins constructing reasons why using it might be justified. I understand it. I don't forgive it. Those are different things. My father asked me once during those 4 months when I was grounded whether I was angry. I told him yes. He asked me what I was doing with the anger. I told him I was using it to pay attention to every document, every log, every detail of the investigation, every piece of the chain that was being assembled. He said that sounded about right. He also said, the sky doesn't care who's angry. It just cares whether you show up prepared. I showed up prepared.